Let's look at page 151, which is Chapter 2, Case Problem Level 3, and it's called CKG Parts Analysis. CKG Parts Analysis. Here are the things that are covered in this exercise. It's always good to read the scenario because that tells you what you're trying to do. So let's read that together. Follow along on page 150 at the bottom, level 3. Another profitable facet of CKG's business is supplying parts for repairs. The most critical component of the parts supply business is having enough of the right things on hand so that your repair shops can receive same-day delivery. The key to profits is minimizing the number of parts that need to be warehoused while also ensuring that sufficient parts are on hand to meet orders. This is called just-in-time, JIT. Because each warehouse center serves a different set of customers, each center must be considered separately. Distribution centers have a 5-day lead time for ordering parts. The lead time must be taken into consideration when determining target inventory levels. Top of 151. The costs involved in warehousing the parts include the working capital tied up in the inventory, that is, how much do the parts cost, as well as the space to store the part. These costs can be substantial. On the other hand, alternative generic parts are often available from rival suppliers, and keeping the auto repair centers supplied and customers satisfied is critical. Last paragraph, one of the most problematic items to supply and store are bearings. This part is both high volume and relatively large, taking up a lot of space. It's also pretty expensive. Analyzing bearing needs is a good place for CKG to start, specifically in one of its largest distribution centers, which serves 10 major customers. You've been asked to analyze the bearing inventory level requirements for this center, including simulating demand based on 30-day historical extremes, calculating a target inventory level based on this, and then comparing simulated values to actual values from the targeted warehouse. There you go. So we're saying we've got a bunch of these parts. We're trying to figure out, here's what has happened in the past. Let's do a simulation, compare it, and say, what levels do we need to keep in stock so that we can satisfy our customers' needs, but we don't have too many of one thing and not enough of another. This is a very real world problem. So let us look at number 1. We're opening parts. I'm going to start from scratch. We're opening the parts spreadsheet. Notice it has apparently historical data from a given particular period. This is the day number. Now we're going to save it as, I'll just call it Mesco Parts on the desktop so I can find it again. Number 2, modify the format of the data so that 0 values are displayed with 0 instead of the dash. Where do we go to do that? File Options, is that right? Under File Options, Formulas. Okay, it says make the dashes into zeros. So one of our students said, here's how I did it, and I think it's a wonderful way. Select all the cells, change them to numbers, and now they all turn to zeros, and now we reduce the number of decimal places, and there they are, to whole numbers with zeros. Voila! Number 3 on page 151 says, on the bearing data worksheet, take the existing 30-day data for each customer So we've got these different customers, and we want to find the high and the low limits of the bearing demand. These were how many they wanted, right? So we got these customers. How many customers do we have? It looks like 10 customers. So I'm going to put at the bottom the high and the low demand. What function would give us the highest and the lowest? Max and min, wouldn't it? I'll skip a line, max and min for each customer. So I'm going to say equals max, open paren, and I will select everything above me. Now, let's think ahead. We're going to be dragging these things to the right, aren't we? And we're going to move it down for the min. But we won't want it to move down on the range. So we would want the rows to stay the same, but the columns to be relative. So I'm going to press F4. It makes it all absolute. I want the row to be absolute and the column to be relative, so that when I drag it down it stays with the rows, but when I drag it across the column moves. I should have selected both of them at once, but I think that's what I want. So there's the max of B4 to B33. Now if I copy it down, it's going to do the same thing because it didn't do the rows, did it? So all I do is change max to min, and now it shows me the lowest thing in those same 30 rows. Now I can select both of them and drag it across, and those formulas should work because now they stay with the rows but they move the columns. Number 4 on page 151. On a new worksheet named Simulation, how do we put a new worksheet in? Click the little plus button and double click on the name and call it Simulation. It says use the high and low limits you just calculated to simulate daily requirements for each customer to obtain a combined daily requirement. Assume that the daily requirements will vary for each customer randomly between the high and the low for each customer. Generate the data for approximately 100 instances and then copy the results as values to another new worksheet. Keep the original analysis intact on the simulation so you can use it again later. Okay, now we want to look at this. It says make sure that everything has the same titles and headings. So what I'm going to do, I probably should have just copied that sheet. That would have been easier. Now that I've read those directions, I think I'll do that. So I'm going to trash this blank sheet and I'm going to make a copy of bearing data. Easiest way to do this, I think, is to hold down the control key, click on it, you get the little plus sign, and now just drag it and it copies that sheet. Let me pull that up on the screen a little more so that you can see the bottom of it. I'm going to trash this again one more time. If you click on something and drag it, it moves it from where it was to where you drop it. Drag and drop is the same as cut and paste. It's the same as move. But if you hold down the control key and drag and drop, you get that little plus sign on it. That's the same as copy and paste. And the same thing works with sheet names, sheet tabs. So if I had a bunch of different sheets, I could just take this bearing data and drag it and move it, drag and drop it anywhere I want. If I hold down the control key and click on it, I get that plus sign, and now when I drag and drop it, it makes a copy of it. So That's just a little sidebar on an easy way to copy sheet. Now that we have copied this sheet, we're going to want to trash the data in it so we can do a simulation. However, if we trash this data, it's going to turn this into all zeros, isn't it? So we might need these values to be copied and pasted as values instead of as formulas. So I'm going to copy all these mins and maxes, copy that. Now I'm going to paste special and paste it as values. And now this is no longer the max of that range, it's actually the number 16. This is now no longer the min of that range, it's actually the number 3. So now I can trash all the numbers. I don't want to trash the day number, but I do want to trash all these values because I'm going to simulate other values. So I've cleared out all the data, I've left the customer numbers, I've left the day in there. Now they want us to have room for 100 days, so I'm going to need to extend this table down. A lot of ways I could do it, but I think what I'll do is I'll just select a ton of rows, well past 100, and I will insert that number of rows. So now my max and min are way down at the bottom, and I'll have at least 100. I'll want to copy the formats down from here, so I'm going to copy this row down, and notice it copied the formatting and it did an autofill on the numbers. Alright, so we've pulled this in, and now we want random numbers in here. I don't like not seeing those customers up at the top, so I'm going to click right here and freeze the top, the rows above. And it doesn't have that, but if I do this and click freeze panes, it freezes everything above and to the left of where I was. So now I can scroll down and see my headings. Now we're going to use the rand between function to generate random numbers. This is very important in a lot of applications for simulation like what we're doing. But think about a game like solitaire on the computer. How does it shuffle a deck? How does it deal a card? It says generate me a random number from 1 to 52. If it's a 1, make it the ace of spades. If it's a 2, make it a 2 of spades. Whatever. Just assign those 52 cards. And once you've dealt that, now assign me another random number, but not the same as the one I just did. So that's how one can use random numbers in game applications. Alright, so we're going to generate things for each of these customers, and we want it to be between their minimum and their maximum demand. So let's go up here in the first cell, and we want the rand between function. So let's use the function wizard. We want rand. There's a rand function, but there's a newer function called rand between, which is much easier to use. So that's the one we're going to use. And the rand between says it needs two things. It needs a bottom number and a top number. And it says this function returns a random number between the numbers you specify. So that's the function we want. And it says, what do you want for your bottom number? Well, I would want, for the bottom number, I would want that minimum from down there, wouldn't I? And I would want it to always be in row 106, but I would want the formula to move to the right, wouldn't I? So I'm going to change that to keep row 106, but make the column move. So relative column, absolute row. And then the top one would be the same thing, only I'd want it in row 105. How we doing on that? And notice it doesn't tell us what the answer is going to be because it says it's volatile. What it does is it goes to the computer's clock and says, what time is this? What's the thousandth of a second? It has some algorithm that's quasi-random. There's no way to get something that's actually random on a computer because you have to program it, and if you program it, it's not random. But this will be close enough for our purposes, and it says 15. Notice something. If I put another formula in here, say equals now to give me today's date, not 0, equals now, watch what happens to that 15 when I press enter. Every time you calculate a formula, it changes that number. This one's already been recalculated. So, and when I deleted that, it recalculated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this formula down. Actually, I think I'll copy it across first, and then I can double click and put them all down at the same time. Now if I double click, it'll fill everything from top to bottom. We want to make sure these are between, here's a 0, so column H ought to have a 0 at the bottom for its minimum. But this one has a minimum of 5, so this column should not have any zeros in it, and it does not. So this is generating random numbers between the least they ever ordered and the most they ever ordered. So that gives us a nice average. Now what we want to do is we're going to leave this simulation here, but what they've asked us to do at the last part of number 4, it says keep the original analysis intact on the simulation worksheet so you can use it again later, but copy these results to another worksheet as values so that they don't change every time you do a formula. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a new sheet. I'm going to call it Simulation 1. Simulation Data 1, because we're going to paste it as values. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and I am going to copy everything from here down. I'm just going to hold down the Shift key and hit page down a few times. And I'm just going to take it down to here where I have just the data. I don't need these anymore because I'm going to paste them as values. So if I copy this, all this, and I go over to my Simulation Data 1 and I choose Paste Special and do it as values, now actually I want to keep the number formats so that I'll keep that values and number formats, so I'll keep that nice formatting, the colored cells. Oh, it didn't do the colored cells. Never mind. Oh, here's something that's really cool. Check this out. These are now numbers. You know about the Format Painter, but in Excel the Format Painter is even more powerful than it is in some other programs, because if we go here and we look at these formats, notice it has this thing centered, it has it bigger and bold and italics, it has this color here and this color here. If we copy all that like we did before, I'm going to select it all, and now if I click this Format Painter, now when I go to the simulation data, all I have to do is click the upper left hand cell and it paints all those different formats just the way they were. So it will do all those different things at once, which is very, very nice. We are ready to do number 5 on page 151. It says on the simulated data 1 worksheet, in an adjacent column, so that would be over here to the right, calculate the total demand by day for all 10 customers. Then use this daily demand total to calculate the daily mean, mode, median, and standard deviation for the combined requirements of all 10. Use cell shading to clearly identify your calculation area. All right, let's put something in this column. We want to put in this column the totals by day for all 10 customers. In other words, if we're looking at this as a random sampling, how many of these do we need on hand every day? Well, day 1 we need this many, and day 2 we need this many. So we're just going to total each row. So let's call it daily needs, and we just want to total. We don't want to total the number in the day. So we would want to say equals sum, and then I'm going to go over and select everything except the day. So that should be these 10 cells, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And notice over here on the left it tells me how many I've got selected. It says I've got 1 row by 10 columns. So that looks good, and we can just leave it all relative. Although I think we're going to do something else in the next column, but so let's keep it on this range. I think we'll be okay. Now we want to copy that down, and it should go down to all row 100. That's the daily needs, and we're saying, yeah, but that changes every day, so we want to find out, well, what's the average, what's the median, what's the mode, what's the standard deviation. So let's figure those out. We want to know the mean, we want to know the median, we want to know the mode, we want to know the standard deviation. And they said make this a colored box so they know it's calculations. So we'll put some sort of color behind it. I'll use a light green here. And now the mean is what function? That's the average, that's right. Average, open paren, I'm going to select all these numbers above me, and because I'm going to copy it down, I want that to stay exactly where it is. So I'm just going to make that reference absolute. So that's the mean. Now I can copy that formula down and just change the name of the function, and I'll be done. So I've got that copied down. On the second one, I change the average function to the median function. On the third one, I change it to mode single. And on the fourth one, I change it to STD, standard deviation S, STDEV.S. So it says the mean, median, mode are pretty close, aren't they? Which means this is a pretty random normal distribution. But because of that distance between the lowest and the highest, between the min and the max, our standard deviation is pretty big too. Number 6 says, extend your analysis on the same worksheet to include a ranking of the data from 1 to 100 so that the day with the least total demand has a rank of 1. So they want a column with rank, and they would say whatever the smallest number is here, we want it to say 1 out beside that. The one that has the biggest number here, we want it to say 100 out beside that. So we're going to use the rank function. Let's use our little insert function button, and we want rank. Let's see what's there. There's a whole bunch of ranks. It says there's a rank function that's basically an older function just for compatibility of earlier versions. There's a rank EQ, which returns the rank of a number in a list, its size relative to other values in the list. If more than one value has the same rank, the top rank of that set of values is returned. In other words, if we had a three-way tie for first place, it would say 1, 1, 1, and then the next one would be number 4. It would be the fourth highest. So I think that's what we want. This average says if more than one value has the same rank, the average rank is returned. So if you had 1, 1, 1, they'd really be, I'm sorry, if you had 1, 2, and 3 and they were the same, it would return 2, 2, 2. So I like that EQ one better. That's a typical standard one. Okay, so we want that. And notice it needs three things. It needs the number, which would be the thing to the left of it. Then it needs the reference, which is what you're comparing it to, all the numbers. And then the third one is what order do you want this. If you want it listed descending, you can omit that. But if you want it ascending, which is what we want, you'd put anything in there, any non-zero value. If you leave it blank or put a 0, it's going to say the person with the most points is number 1. But we want it like a golf score. The person with the least number of strokes is number 1. Okay. So the number that we're going to refer to rank is the thing just to the left of me. So I'm just clicking right to the left, clicking just to the left. And now the reference is an array or a reference to a list of numbers. So the reference is this whole thing, isn't it? And I want that to be absolute because I want it to stay the same, not move down when the formula goes down. So, and notice it says, based on what you told me, this guy is ranked 71st. But that's in descending order. So now if I put any non-zero value, just for the heck of it, I'm going to put 44 in there. Now it says, oh, I turn it around. He was 71 the other way, but 100 minus 71 is 29. So that's where he is now, because we're doing them from lowest to highest. Make sure that's what it says, so that the day with the least total demand has rank of 1. Okay, so I'm going to click OK. That gives me the rank. I'm going to double click the fill box and it will go all the way down. And they said, again, use cell shading to clearly identify. So I am going to select all those and do a different color of shading. And that's the rank. So we have sorted this. Actually, we have ranked this, and the number 1 ranking right here should be the smallest number. There might be a tie, and it's also rated number 1. But we can check this out very easily. I'm going to select the column titles and all the data underneath it, and now I'm going to sort it by rank, smallest to largest. And now if I click OK, it says here's the number 1 rank. It's the smallest number on there. Number 2 had 2 values, so there's a tie. This next one is in 4th place because there's 3 that are smaller than it. There's a 3-way tie. This next one's in 7th place because there are 6 numbers smaller than it. And if you scroll down, you'll see that these numbers are always getting bigger. That's what we wanted. So it looks like our ranking is working. I will undo that now to put them back the way they were. On page 151, number 7 says, to the right of the data, create a listing of the top and bottom 5 daily combined demands from the 100 simulated instances. Well, here's our daily combined commands, the things that we just ranked. And we want to know what are the highest 5 and what are the lowest 5. So basically, if we stuck this in order again, the way we just had it, we would say I want numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and I want numbers 100, 99, 98, 97, 96. Although I think they want the highest 5 values, not the 5 rankings, because we might have some ties. So let's look at that. We're going to use the large and the small functions. Let's look at the large function. We will use our little thing here, the large function. It says it returns the kth largest value in a data set. For example, the 5th largest number. So we can say, here's our array, which would be this whole thing, wouldn't it? Our daily needs. It's that same thing, absolute. And then we could say, what's our top one? The first position. Actually, that's going to be the first largest number. So that would be what was ranked at the bottom of our ranking. And notice it says 90 is the biggest number. Now, we don't want to put 1 in there and 2 in there because we're going to want the lowest ones, and we want people to know what that is. So we are going to put the numbers out here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now we are going to refer to that cell and say, show me the biggest guy that's here. And I want to keep it in column N, don't I? But I want it to move down as I copy the formula down. So there's the biggest guy, and then when I copy the formula down, it'll be the next biggest guy, and the next biggest guy, and the next biggest guy. And it went down much further, and I didn't have any numbers there, so we'll get rid of that. Okay, so those are the 5 biggest numbers. Now we'll say this is the highest demand, highest 5, and these will be the lowest 5, and then these will be daily demand extremes. And we would do the same thing, except we'd use the small. So I'm going to copy these over, and they should stay the same. But now I'll just change this to the small function, and notice it says it returns the kth smallest value in the data set. So this should be our number 44, which was our lowest number. And there's our 44, and when we copy it down, it gives us those lowest numbers. Basically, if we sorted this like we did before and said show me them in order from 1 to 100, these would be the first 5 and these would be the bottom 5. We're starting from the bottom and coming up. And they tell us they want us to clearly identify this listing using borders and shading. So we will do borders on this. Let's do all borders. And then we'll do some nice shading on that. Ooh, how about a nice dark color of the shading, like a dark purple, but make the text white. Isn't that pretty? And let's make this font smaller and center it across those 2 cells, and maybe even italicize it.